And I'm here to talk to you about the tragic event that's taken place and is currently taking place at the Mandalay Bay. We experienced an active shooter situation.
The official history of the Las Vegas shooting is anchored to a single timestamp, 10:05 p.m. This is the moment documented by the FBI as the start of the massacre and the time used to measure every official response that followed. However, the internal hardware logs from the Mandalay Bay record a different reality. One that began 360 seconds earlier behind a modified fire door on the 32nd floor. To find the origin of this discrepancy, we have to look at the physical architecture of the floor. At 9:50 p.m., security guard Jesus Campos discovered that the northern stairwell fire door adjacent to Suite 32-135 had been mechanically bolted shut. This was not an improvised barricade. It involved heavy-duty L brackets that had been manually screwed into the commercial-grade steel of the door frame. This modification is a critical piece of forensic data. Penetrating industrial steel requires specific power tools and specialized hardware. While the FBI's evidence logs for the suite include various drills and bits, the final report omits a forensic match between the tools in the room and the specific security screws recovered from the door frame. The presence of these brackets created a tactical dead end, effectively neutralizing the primary service entry used by hotel security and preventing any attempt to flank the shooter's position. At 9:58 p.m., Campos utilized his internal radio to report the bracketed door to maintenance. As he moved from the stairwell into the hallway, he recorded the sound of a high-cadence drilling originating from the direction of the suite. At 9:59 p.m., 6 minutes before the official timeline begins, the primary record shows that the 32nd floor became an active crime scene. The shooter discharged a burst of approximately 200 rounds through the door of his suite and into the hallway. Campos was struck in the left thigh and forced to retreat into the hallway, a clove to radio for help. Within 60 seconds, maintenance engineer Stephen Schuck arrived to the floor to inspect the door and was immediately pinned down by a second volley of fire. At 10 p.m., the hotel's internal logs captured Schuck's radio transmission. "Call the police. Someone is firing a rifle on the 32nd floor." Despite this direct report of rifle fire at a specific location, the public narrative does not acknowledge the shooting until 10:05 p.m. For 6 minutes, a high-intensity engagement was occurring on the 32nd floor. Yet, the crowd at the Route 91 festival continued the concert, unaware that the primary record of this event was already running. In an active shooter situation, the speed of information is the only metric that determines the survival rate of the crowd. At 10 p.m., the Mandalay Bay internal logs confirm that hotel dispatch was in possession of the three most critical pieces of data: a confirmed shooter, the weapon type, a rifle, and the exact location, the 32nd floor. Yet, for the next 6 minutes, the data remained trapped within a digital silo. To understand why, we have to look at the architecture of the radio systems. The Mandalay Bay operates on a trunked radio system using multiple internal channels. Emergency traffic on the 32nd floor was isolated on what is known as a burn channel, a dedicated frequency for immediate security threats. Standard protocol for a Tier 1 emergency dictates that the hotel dispatcher immediately patches this burn channel directly into the LVMPD dispatch center. This bridge allows every officer on the street to hear the raw audio from the floor as it happens. On October 1st, that patch was never established. As a result, while hotel security was listening to Stephen Schuck scream for police assistance on the 32nd floor, the LVMPD officers on the Zebra dispatch channel were hearing nothing but routine traffic. When the first rounds finally hit the festival at 10:05, the police were not just behind, they were blind. The primary record of the police response at 10:06 p.m. reveals the consequences of this blackout. Instead of breaching the 32nd floor, officers on the ground are recorded scrambling to identify the source of fire. They are seen on body cam looking at the rooftops of the Luxor and the festival parking lots. They were searching for a shooter that the hotel's internal logs had already pinned to a specific room 6 minutes earlier. The FBI's final report characterizes this as a communication delay, but on the evidence table, a 6-minute failure to patch an emergency channel isn't a delay. It's a protocol blackout that allowed the shooter to operate with a 360-second head start. When a crime scene is processed, investigators look for signatures, the physical evidence that links a suspect to their actions. In room 32-135, the signature left on the furniture and the firearms match the shooter. But the signature left on the architecture of the building itself tells a different story. To secure the fire door and the northern stairwell, the bracket had to be driven into the steel frame using high torque security screws. In industrial construction, these are typically Torx, or hex security fasteners, designed to be tamper-proof and requiring specific, hardened driver bits. When we examine the FBI's evidence manifest for the suite, we find an array of power tools, including a Makita hammer drill and several standard bit sets. However, the final report fails to document a forensic match between the specific security bits found in the room and the unique drive signatures of the screws recovered from the fire door. This is the Torx anomaly. To bolt that door required more than just a drill. It required a specific knowledge of the Mandalay Bay's internal hardware and a specialized bit that does not appear as a confirmed match in the shooter's inventory. And the physical mismatches extend beyond the hardware. Investigators recovered a phone charger in the suite that did not match any of the mobile devices owned by the shooter. In the context of a lone wolf investigation, an unidentified piece of technology in a secured room is a significant forensic lead. Yet, in the official summary, this detail was categorized as an unresolved item rather than an indicator of a second presence. Finally, we have the missing metadata. The shooter's laptop was recovered at the scene, but the primary storage drive was missing. The FBI concluded that the shooter removed and destroyed the drive to hide his motive. But if the goal was total destruction of the data, it stands in direct contrast to the 2,000 gigabytes of digital data he left elsewhere, including his search history, travel logs, and financial records. On the evidence table, these aren't just missing pieces. These are indicators of a scrubbed environment. If the official narrative is accurate, we are looking at a man who was meticulous enough to professionally disable a fire door with specialized bits he may not have owned, yet careless enough to leave a stranger's charger on the nightstand. The primary record shows a room that was tactically prepared but forensically inconsistent with a single occupant. The most difficult evidence to reconcile in the official narrative is not found in the hotel rooms or the police logs, but in the air itself. Acoustic ballistics is a precise science based on the physics of sound and the speed of projectiles. In the Las Vegas investigation, the primary record consists of thousands of hours of synchronized cell phone footage, which serves as a distributed microphone array across the festival grounds. To understand the gunfire, we have to isolate two distinct sounds: the supersonic crack of the bullet passing as the microphone and the muzzle blast originating from the rifle. Because bullets travel faster than the speed of sound, the crack always precedes the blast. By measuring the delay between these two sounds, investigators can triangulate the distance and location of the source. When this analysis is applied to the synchronized footage from October 1st, a significant anomaly emerges as the acoustic overlap. In several high-fidelity recordings, the primary record captures two distinct muzzle blasts, occurring simultaneously from different directional origins. According to the official report, the shooter utilized bump stock modified rifles to simulate automatic fire from a single fixed point in room 32-135. However, the acoustic signature of a single weapon, even when modified, follows a linear rhythmic pattern. The data from the festival floor reveals a non-linear overlap. two separate rhythmic signatures that do not align with the cycle of a single bolt or a single barrel. The geometry of the physical hits further complicates the lone wolf conclusion. One notable piece of evidence is the bass guitar played by a performer on stage. Forensic analysis of the instrument followed a direct hit originating from the trajectory that is consistent with the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay. Similarly, the shots fired at the aviation fuel tanks at the edge of the perimeter suggest a line of fire that requires an elevation and an angle different from the suite's windows. Finally, we look at the Mac effect, recorded by witnesses near the northern end of the festival. Multiple witnesses reported hearing gunfire that sounded local, as if the muzzle blast was occurring at ground level or from a lower elevation, such as the Luxor or the parking structures. While the FBI attributed this to echoes reflecting off the glass towers of the Strip, acoustic triangulation of these specific clips show a lack of spectral decay, typical of an echo. On the evidence table, an echo is a ghost of a sound. These recordings show two distinct primary signatures. If the official narrative is the truth, the physics of sound had to fail for 10 minutes. If the primary record is the truth, the perimeter of the attack is wider than a single room. In the official summary, Stephen Schuck is often relegated to a supporting role. But in the primary record, Schuck's radio transmissions provide the most accurate acoustic map of the hallway before the massacre began. 15 seconds after 10 p.m., while the public narrative remains in a state of pre-incident quiet, Schuck is recorded calling into hotel dispatch. He does not report firecrackers or disturbances, he reports a rifle. The significance of this call lies in the specific terminology used. Schuck was a trained maintenance engineer capable of distinguishing between mechanical failures and kinetic weapons fire. His request for a Code 3 and his explicit warning for security to take cover indicates that by 10:01 p.m., the situation on the 32nd floor had been identified as a high-threat environment. However, the investigation reveals a secondary blackout in the dispatch logs. While Schuck's call was received and acknowledged by hotel's internal dispatchers, there is no record of this confirmation being relayed to the LVMPD officers stationed at the Mandalay Bay Valet. These officers were less than 200 feet from the service elevators. If the internal protocol had been followed, the active data from Schuck would have reached the valet team by 10:02 p.m. Instead, those officers remained at their posts, receiving no update from the hotel's burn channel. On the evidence table, there is more than a delay. It is a failure of lateral communication. The hotel had a confirmed shooter in a confirmed floor, while the police were standing in the lobby waiting for a phone to ring. This brings us to the final minute of the shadow timeline. At 10:04 p.m., a full 5 minutes after the first shot was fired at Jesus Campos, the shooter transitioned from the hallway door to the shattered windows. The primary record shows that the first shots into the crowd were not the beginning of the crime. They were the result of a system that allowed 6 minutes of clarity to dissolve into a narrative drift. The investigation into the 6-minute gap reveals a system that was warned but failed to react. We have established that the failure of the timeline and the failure of the protocol. But identifying the breakdown of the system is only the first layer of the file. The primary record shows that the room was tactically prepared, but it also shows a man who does not fit the forensic profile of a mass killer. In the next file, we move from architecture of the floor into the architecture of the man himself. We will examine the financial anomalies, the missing storage drive, and the unidentified presence in room 32-135. This case isn't settled, it's just quiet. This is the evidence table.